Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your complex stack of sources and distill them into the most fascinating nuggets of knowledge.
Today's deep dive is really bridging millennia. We're connecting concepts that on the surface seem to have nothing to do with each other.
Right.
We're going from ancient legislative texts in Exodus through Stoic philosophy on, internal control, all the way to 16th century political theology about demonic chaos.
It's a study in how societies define and, I guess, try to restrain the absolute worst forms of disorder. On one end, you have a very specific crime, man-stealing, the literal theft of a person.
And on the other, you have this huge metaphysical concept, the mystery of lawlessness that could just undo civilization itself.
So our sources, the covenant codes, critiques of biblical ethics, Epictetus, even political thinkers like Schmidt and Bowden, they all seem to ask one core question.
Yeah. What are the necessary boundaries? And what kind of force, whether it's internal or external, is needed to keep society from just dissolving?
So let's start at the foundation, with the law. When you hear the commandment, thou shalt not steal, it sounds like it's about taking property.
It does, but traditional Jewish commentary has long argued that in its original context, this is really about kidnapping.
So not stealing a thing, but a person.
Exactly, and that elevates the crime to a capital offense. It makes a huge distinction between stealing a person and stealing, some goods.
And the covenant code is really specific about this.
Oh, it doesn't mince words at all. If you look at Exodus 21.1 scene, it states it plainly. Whoever steals a man and sells him, and anyone found in possession of him shall be put to death.
Wow. So think about the gravity there. It's not just the person who does the kidnapping or the selling.
No.
It's anyone found just possessing the person. That's a death penalty offense.
It is. Man-stealing was the most direct way to get slaves, and this law treats it as the highest possible crime against society.
Now, there's a debate about the scope of that law, right? The Hebrew word used is ish.
Right, ish, which can just mean person. So some readings suggest this law protects everyone, man, woman, child, Israelite, or foreigner. It's about the basic sanctity of a person.
But that's not the only interpretation.
No, and history complicates it. When you look at the Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation, it seems to narrow it. It says stealing one of the sons of Israel.
Which changes the ethical weight completely. It becomes about protecting your own community, not necessarily all people.
And that tension is important. But if you zoom out to the broader ancient Near East, this idea of kidnapping as a capital crime, it wasn't unique to the Bible.
Right, Hammurabi's code.
Exactly. Hammurabi's Law 14 is crystal clear. If a man should kidnap the young child of another man, he shall be killed. It's also a capital offense.
And this gets to a key critique in your sources, doesn't it? The idea that we sometimes overstate the Bible's humanitarian advancement.
Well, critics like Robert Avalos point out that if you only compare biblical law to selected cuneiform laws, you can get a skewed picture.
So what's a counterexample?
The laws of Eshnunna, they're interesting because they had, monetary fines for property theft, but if a debt slave died in your custody, that was a death sentence. So the lines between life and property weren't so simple. It was a complex legal world.
That complexity really makes it hard to just pick up these ancient codes and use them as a simple ethical blueprint today, especially for something like human trafficking.
Which brings us to probably the most challenging ethical critique in this whole stack.
Hagar.
The story of Hagar in Genesis 16. It gets really interesting here.
So to set it up, Hagar is an Egyptian slave woman. Sarai gives her to Abram for reproductive purposes.
Right. And by the UN's modern definition, she's a trafficked person.
Yep.
Transferred, no consent, for exploitation.
And when Sarai abuses her, Hagar runs away. That's a clear act of non-consent. She's trying to get out.
She is. But then the story takes this turn that's, it's profoundly challenging for a modern reader.
The angel of the Lord.
Yes, the angel finds her and gives her a direct divine command. Return to your mistress and submit to her.
It's a divine endorsement of her returning to an abusive, enslaved situation.
It is. The text, in that moment, actively upholds the institution of slavery and the submission it demands. And that's a huge problem for anyone wanting to use the Bible as a simple, uncritical guide to fight trafficking today.
This theme of non-resistance comes up elsewhere, too, in the New Testament.
You see it in Jesus' teachings in Matthew 5. Turn the other cheek, give up your coat, go the extra mile.
And the critique in the sources is that Jesus seems to prescribe the exact same response, whether someone takes your coat property or forces you to go 1 mile, which is a removal of your person.
There's no explicit difference made there between property seizure and, well, the seizure of a person.
And there's a similar ambiguity with a key term in 1 Timothy, right? The word anthropodestais.
Yes, it's often translated today as slave traders, but it only appears once in the entire New Testament.
And what do scholars think it actually means?
The consensus is that andropodistos refers to someone who kidnaps a free person or steals someone else's slave, so it's man stealing again.
Not slave trading as an institution.
Exactly. And that's a crucial distinction. Condemning kidnapping was just standard Greco-Roman law. It was about protecting citizens and property. It wasn't a radical statement against the entire system of slavery.
So it's clear that legal codes, even ethical teachings, have their limits in maintaining order. And that seems to force our focus to shift.
It does. It moves us away from just legal restraint toward this bigger idea of metaphysical restraint.
Which is a perfect transition. So if the legal framework is challenged, what else is there? And your sources point to 2 very different ancient mechanisms for managing chaos. One internal, one external.
Let's start with the internal one, the Stoic approach, with Epictetus.
Right. His big distinction.
His key distinction in the Enchiridion is between things in our power, our opinions, our desires, and things totally beyond our power, our body, property, reputation.
And he says our inner turmoil, our chaos, isn't caused by the things that happen, but by our views of those things.
Exactly. He famously says death isn't terrible because if it were, it would have appeared so to Socrates.
So the whole promise of Stoicism is, if you only claim what's truly yours, your mind, your will, then the chaos of the world can't touch you. You build an internal fortress.
That's the idea, but it relies completely on self-mastery.
Okay, so now let's pivot to the idea that self-mastery isn't enough, that you need some kind of external ultimate power. And that brings us to the katechon.
The katechon, it's a concept from Paul's second letter to the Thessalonians. Paul talks about this mystery of lawlessness that's already at work.
But the final lawless one, the Antichrist, is being held back
by a force or a person known as the katechon, the restrainer.
And the name itself is fascinating. The text uses both what is restraining and he who now restrains.
This dual identity, impersonal and personal, has led to centuries of debate. Is it the Holy Spirit, the Roman Empire, the state itself acting as the force holding back total collapse?
The identity is ambiguous.
But its function is not. It's about holding back the ultimate chaos.
And this theological idea of a restrainer becomes the foundation for modern political philosophy.
Absolutely. Thinkers like Carl Schmitt saw this clearly. The whole idea of absolute state sovereignty came about in the 16th century precisely because order was collapsing.
During the religious wars, like the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre.
Exactly. Jean Baudin, writing in 1576, defines sovereignty as this absolute power needed to stop society from imploding. And for him, the chaos wasn't just political. He saw it as a literal war against witches and demons.
So the sovereign's job is to hold the line against demonic chaos.
Yes, and that fear crossed the Atlantic. Early American colonists like Cotton Mather had the same view. Their settlements were this little bubble of order holding back a terrifying chaos.
And Carl Schmitt brings it into the modern era.
Schmitt argues that all modern political concepts are just secularized theological ones. For him, the key power of the sovereign isn't following the law. It's the ability to suspend the law, to declare an exception, to preserve order against a threat.
To keep civilization from falling back into the witch's cauldron.
You could even frame it in Nietzschean terms. It's the Apollonian order, structure, law, trying to restrain the Dionysian chaos, ecstasy, the dissolution of the self. Without that restraint, civilization can't exist.
So we have this massive concept. Order is defined by what it restrains. Kidnapping, individual chaos, or this ultimate metaphysical lawlessness.
Exactly.
But we've been talking about severity, right? Capital punishment, the absolute sovereign. Let's circle back to the ground level. How did these early laws restrain their own potential for injustice?
They introduced concepts of due process, safeguards.
And the most important one was the witness requirement.
The most foundational, yes. For any capital charge, you needed a minimum of 2 adverse witnesses. That's a direct command in Deuteronomy and Numbers. 1 witness was not enough to put someone to death.
And the gravity of that is just astonishing. The witnesses had to cast the first stone.
Right. Which was meant to make them feel the weight of their testimony. This isn't just words, this is life and death. And if you lied, perjury was a capital crime in itself. The principle of lex talionis, life for life, could be applied to a false witness. It's a huge incentive for truth.
They also made careful distinctions between types of killing.
Yes, between premeditated murder and unintentional manslaughter. The murderer was handed over to the Avenger of Blood.
The Goel Hadam.
But for manslaughter, they created the cities of refuge, places of asylum where someone could flee from the Avenger, at least until they had a proper trial.
And there's that really curious rule about the high priest.
Yes, even if you were found innocent of murder, you were confined to that city until the high priest died. We don't know the exact reasoning, but it was a practical way to let tempers cool, to let time pass.
And finally, there's the concept of equal protection.
Which is powerful. Leviticus 24.22 says, "You shall have one law for the sojourner and for the native."
So it applied to everyone, regardless of status.
Equal liability and equal protection. A foreigner who committed a crime faced the same penalty as an Israelite, but they also got the same legal protections. It's a remarkable step toward universal justice.
So we've tracked the severity of ancient law, defining man-stealing as this ultimate crime, while also seeing these procedural safeguards put in place.
We've also seen how religious texts could sometimes uphold, not challenge, systems of exploitation, demanding submission even to trafficking.
And we followed that philosophical thread from the internal discipline of Stoicism all the way to the political justification for state power, the katechon, as the essential external force against chaos.
So you've now navigated this complex landscape where the worst crimes sit right next to the first forms of due process. And you've seen how this metaphysical idea of holding back lawlessness still informs the state's claim to its greatest powers.
It really brings us back to that core conflict. You have Epictetus telling us that real freedom comes from internal discipline, from ignoring externals.
But then you have this entire political tradition based on the katechon, arguing that the external order, the state, is the only thing that makes philosophy or any civilized life even possible.
So given all these sources, you're left with a question.
Which restraint is truly more vital for genuine freedom? The internal restraint of the self or the external restraint of the state? And what happens to freedom when one of those systems of control tries to completely obliterate the other?